I recently saw Oskar van Deventer Screw cube, which is a 2x2x1 with additional faces that screw on and off vertically. I wanted to make a 2x2x4 version of it, so I designed the mechanism. Then I realized that it wouldn't actually work as a 2x2x4, unfortunately. So I turned it into a cross 2x2 with all the faces having a screw thread. Then I printed the pieces using my 3D printer and assembled the puzzle. This puzzle is part of the Puzzle Advent Calendar, a collaboration between many different creators to bring you 24 daily videos showing original puzzles. Make sure to subscribe to the next person in the sequence and check out the project's official Instagram, both linked below. I just thought I'd show you this specific part of the build process because you can pretty much see how the entire puzzle works. I've stickered it and you can see that the middle has kind of this spiral pattern, so that you can tell when you can actually turn the outer layers. Because if this pattern is broken, then you cannot turn them. However, if this pattern is maintained with any combination of colors on the inside, then you can turn the outer layers. And you can see here that this is actually a mini Ishin 2x2 mod. Just a very large mod. It makes the inner 2x2 look tiny by comparison. And you can see here the threads that make this outer layer setup move just like screws. And now what I'm going to do is the final step of assembling, which is to glue this onto there. I know a lot of people use fancy methods for this. They like to prep it with sandpaper or something. I don't really do that. I found that in my experience, it sticks just well enough if I don't really do that. Obviously, do this at your own discretion. And another note is I'm making this for myself, so if it's good enough for myself, then that's enough. I'm not selling this. So just a bit of super glue on the inside. Sure to cover all three of the faces with it. And then put it in here and push it in as hard as I can, and then just hold it to let the super glue bond, because releasing it now would just be a very poor idea. The bond would either be weaker or it just wouldn't bond at all. So you want to push it in as hard as you can and just hold it there for a little bit, and then after maybe like 20 to 30 seconds, then I'm fully confident that it no longer needs to be held and it'll stay together. The only downside of this method is that the puzzle cannot be disassembled later. However, I don't really think I need to disassemble it. Like, it's not adjustable anyway, so I'm not locking in any kind of tensions. And yeah, I'm not going to be replacing any pieces. So yeah. Also, worst comes to worst, it is actually disassemblable if the caps on the inner mini Ishin 2x2 come off. Alright, I think that's enough, and this is done. Wow, this thing's huge. Just for reference, here's a 57mm Square 3 Plus, I think. Is that what this is? Yeah. Just a dwarf compared to this thing. This thing is absolutely massive, and don't forget, it was made from a mini Ishin 2x2, which is tiny. But anyway, that's this build section. Now I'm going to take this thing outside and see how it turns. So, how did the cross screw cube turn out? Honestly, for something that I designed and built in a very short span of time, It's really not that bad. It turns fine overall, although I did need to break it in quite a lot before it turned fine. But that's not really a problem, that's just a trend I've been noticing with a lot of my recent puzzles. As you can see, the 2x2 turns are very smooth. I don't actually know if it corner cuts because I really never bothered finding out. It's not very hard to line up all the pieces though, given the fact that they're so big. Of the outer faces, you can see the white one turns very easily, and that's simply because it's the one I've broken in the most. The rest of the outer faces turn perfectly fine, but their smoothness depends on how much they've been broken in. Overall, it's definitely a very playable puzzle. There aren't any turns that are too stiff, there aren't any major alignment problems, and if you do mess up on the alignment for whatever reason, it doesn't really pop on you unless you really force it to that point. So it's reasonable enough to use. Now the quirk is, you have to pay attention to the specific pattern that's on the central pieces, because the spiral on the central stickers needs to be complete for you to be able to make screw turns. That's an unintentional side effect of the way I designed the puzzle, and personally I don't like it as a feature, but I don't think it restricts the puzzle too much in the grand scheme of things. For a future updated version of the puzzle though, it's definitely a goal to remove this restriction. It's fairly easy to tell whether or not you can make an outer turn, because the spiral is decently well defined in the stickers. From the solved state, if you turn the 2x2 without breaking up the red or orange faces, you'll be able to turn the outer layers with any combination of faces. If you turn it on the other two axes though, in most cases you won't be able to make a lot of outer turns. When solving the puzzle, if you solve the 2x2 first, it's quite easy to set it up so you can make outer turns whenever you want. One of my goals for the future is to redesign this puzzle, making it smaller, because as you can see it's huge, and to actually make a 2x2x4 version with a different mechanism. I've been thinking maybe I'll do it with a double-sided screw thread, but I'll figure out the details when I get to it. I also think it would be pretty cool to see what an X-Cube type version would look like, where 4 of the faces have the extra outer turns, and then 2 of them just don't, and are normal 2x2 faces. You can see here an example of a pattern that does not have the spiral, so you flat out can't turn the outer layer. If you force it, either it won't go anywhere, or you'll end up breaking something. However, that being said, I honestly don't think the puzzle would break even if you forced it quite a bit. That's because it's actually overbuilt in my opinion. One of the reasons it's so big is because originally in the design stage, I thought the screw thread was going to be fairly fragile. So I wanted to make it big so that there's no chance of it breaking off or anything like that. However, after looking at the pieces in their physical forms, and assembling the puzzle and playing with it, I have no doubt that this puzzle really is just overbuilt, and a smaller sized screw thread, smaller sized pieces, just everything in general being smaller would make the puzzle better overall without sacrificing a lot of stability, and the puzzle would still be strong enough to play with normally. I'm kind of surprised just how resilient the screw thread mechanism actually is. It turns out that I greatly underestimated it. Just as a side note, right here is an example of why I don't like the spiral restriction. I thought I could make this turn, but apparently at some point I broke the spiral, so I can't. I really don't like artificial difficulty for the sake of it, and I think the puzzle will be more enjoyable without this restriction. But anyway, the main solving challenge of this puzzle is that unlike on a cross 2x2, you can have pieces of different elevations all on the same face. This makes the puzzle more difficult because you can have the colors all solved, but the elevations unsolved. You can have many different elevations on a single face, so it gets pretty crazy. Overall though, the puzzle is basically just a cross 2x2 with the additional challenge of making all the outer pieces have the correct height. Something I find exciting is the possibility of making interesting and wacky patterns using the whole feature of the screw thread. Imagine the possibilities now that your pieces can all be at different heights. I just think it'll be interesting to see what people could come up with. All that said, that's enough talking for now, so let's go ahead and scramble the cross screw 2x2. It should look pretty crazy when it's all mixed up. Alright, now we are going to solve this thing. Yeah, look at this. It looks so ridiculous with all of the pieces just being at different heights. It just almost looks broken, as one of my friends would say. But yeah, so the first step I'm gonna do is fairly uncomplicated. I'm just gonna solve it like a 2x2, because as you can see, most if not all of these outer faces can't turn because the spiral pattern is not made. So in an effort to make it so that I can actually use the most important part of the puzzle, yeah, I need to solve it like a 2x2. So I'll start off with that. Alright, believe it or not, this thing is now actually solved as a 2x2. You can see that mainly on these inner faces, which actually is the only way you can even tell. Oh, and it looks like I conveniently solved the green side. That's odd, because I remember scrambling it. But anyway, so yeah, the only way you can actually tell is these inner faces. And you can see this orange here, this white here, and this green here are a single 2x2 corner. Like, that's what we're dealing with. It's not exactly the most, like, welcoming perspective for a 2x2 solve, but you know what? It's reasonable enough. Anyway, I guess we got lucky with this green face. It's already solved, and it is in the correct orientation because yellow is here. And what I'm gonna do now is just solve all of the faces only by color as a cross 2x2. Now, I can't completely ignore the elevation because obviously there's a limit of how far you can turn everything. Like, there's a finite amount of times I could make a U-prime turn, and a finite amount of times I can make a U-turn on any of these faces. So I just have to be mindful of that. And another thing is, it only takes one piece that's on his top thread or bottom thread to stop the whole process, because you can see, even though this isn't at the bottom, this could still go down, and in fact, so could this other piece. This can't go any further because these two pieces are at the bottom. So this should be quite an interesting cross 2x2 type solve. I decided not to show you guys the cross 2x2 solve because it was a fairly uneventful one, and it took just a little bit. But yeah, here's where this puzzle really comes into its own. Look at this. All of the colors are solved. All of them. On every single face. And the shapes are all different. If you were solving a cross 2x2, you'd be done right now. But instead, I have to figure out how to bring this down 2 threads, this down 1 thread. These are fine, and etc. So this is really where the puzzle comes into its own, and I think it should be a really fun experience. So let's see what we can do. Alright, you can see here that I've solved the shape on every face except for the last 2, where you can see they're still very much unsolved. And I think this is going to be the most difficult part, because previously what I could do is just kind of use a face as a work face, where I just do all of the rises and falls. but I don't really have that anymore, so I have to figure out how to just manipulate these two faces so that everything gets solved. Alright, this thing is solved. I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't really know what exactly I did to bring these pieces down. I just kind of did random things that I thought might work, and it ended up working. But if you were to actually try and solve this thing like multiple times, then you definitely want to work out a parity algorithm of some sort. Overall, definitely a worthwhile experience, especially considering how cool it was to look at it in the state where all of the colors were solved, but the rest of the puzzle wasn't. But anyway, that's all for this video. Make sure to subscribe to the Next Person in the Puzzle Advent Calendar. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a good day.